You've got some nerve claiming that card is yours.
You think I'm foolish enough to believe that? Tell me where'd you steal it from?
Officer Porter moved in close.
Officer, I didn't steal anything. It's my account card.
Lady, you're really in no position to lie to me right now.
Turn around. Hands behind your back.
Victoria didn't move or flinch. She simply watched as Porter reached for the handcuffs. What David Porter didn't know was that he had just snapped handcuffs onto the wrists of the most powerful prosecutor in Hargrove County. And he had absolutely no idea what he had just done. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The bank smelled like cold air and carpet cleaner. Victoria Casper walked out of the private wealth office at 9:14 on a Thursday morning in October, sliding her copy of the estate transfer documents into her bag. The folder was thin. The number inside it was not. $3,100,000. Her mother's entire life, converted into a balance on a screen. Temporary. Just sitting there while Victoria sorted the trusts and charitable accounts over the coming weeks. She didn't feel rich. She felt tired. Her mother had been gone for 6 weeks. There hadn't been time to grieve properly. There was never time. There were cases to try, a county to run, and a staff of 22 people whose paychecks depended on the district attorney showing up and doing the job. So Victoria showed up. She always showed up. She adjusted the strap of her bag and crossed the lobby toward the ATM by the far wall. The bank was quiet at this hour. A teller typed behind the counter. An older man filled out a deposit slip near the door. Morning light came through the wide front windows and fell across the marble floor in long yellow rectangles. It was the kind of ordinary Thursday morning that asked nothing of anybody. Victoria inserted her card. She entered her PIN, the same one she'd used for 11 years, and selected withdrawal. $200. Cash for Mrs. Patricia, who came every Friday and had been cleaning Victoria's apartment since Victoria was still a public defender, sharing an office with 4 other people. The machine processed. The balance appeared on the screen. $3,412.88. Victoria blinked at it for a half-second. That number still didn't feel real. It probably wouldn't for a while. She pressed confirm, waited for the bills to slide out, and folded them into her wallet without counting them. She pulled out her card, picked up her bag, turned to leave, and stopped. A man was standing 3 feet away. He was big, wide through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. His uniform was Hargrove PD. His name tag read Porter. He was maybe 40-something, with the kind of eyes that had already made up their mind about you before you opened your mouth. He was looking at her the way people looked at things that didn't belong. Victoria had been looked at that way before, more times than she could count. In courtrooms, in parking lots, in grocery stores. She knew that look the way she knew her own reflection. She met his eyes and waited. Porter had been called to the bank 40 minutes earlier about a disturbance near the front entrance. Turned out to be nothing. 2 guys arguing over a parking spot, both gone by the time he arrived. He should have left. He'd been about to leave. Then he saw her at the ATM. Young, black, dressed nicely but not flashy. Plain blazer, plain bag. Nothing that said money. Nothing that said this woman belongs in front of a screen showing 7 figures. He'd watched the whole thing. Watched her type in her PIN like it was nothing. Watched that number appear on the screen. Watched her fold $200 into her wallet like it was pocket change. His eyes had narrowed. Something about it bothered him. He couldn't have explained why if he tried, and he wouldn't have tried. It was just a feeling. A certainty that settled in his chest without reason or evidence, and told him that what he had just seen did not add up. 16 years on the force had given David Porter a lot of things. Good instincts wasn't one of them. What it had given him was a deep, unshakable confidence in whatever he already believed. He took a step forward. "Ma'am?" His voice landed like a hand on a shoulder. Heavy. Unwelcome. "I need you to stop right there." Victoria didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She stood exactly where she was, her bag hanging from her shoulder, the $200 folded in her wallet, the receipt from the ATM still warm in her hand. She looked at him. She had stood in front of judges who tried to make her feel small. She had cross-examined witnesses who lied to her face. She had walked into rooms where everyone in them had assumed she didn't belong. She was still standing. "Officer," she said. Her voice was calm, careful, controlled in the way of someone who had learned a long time ago that composure was its own kind of armor. "Is there a problem?" "I need your ID," he said. Victoria had her ID out. She hadn't waited for him to finish the request. She'd heard it coming in the way he squared his shoulders, in the shift of his weight toward her. She knew what came next. She'd known it the moment she turned around and saw his face. She held the card out between two fingers. Steady. No hesitation. Porter looked at it. Didn't take it right away. Let it hang there in the air between them for a beat too long, just to remind her who was in charge of this conversation. Then he plucked it from her hand. He studied it, studied her, looked back at the ID like the two things weren't matching up the way they should. Victoria Casper. He said her name like he was testing it. "This your card? The ATM card?" "Yes." "And that account, the one on the screen just now, that's yours?" "Yes." "That's a lot of money for a—" He stopped himself, but only barely. The rest of the sentence hung in the air between them, unfinished and ugly. Victoria didn't fill it in for him. She just waited. "Where'd it come from?" Porter said. "My mother's estate." Her voice didn't waver. "She passed 6 weeks ago. The transfer was finalized this morning in the wealth management office. You're welcome to speak with someone on staff." Porter's jaw shifted. He handed her ID back without looking at her, turned slightly away, like he was thinking, like he was giving this serious professional consideration. Then he turned back. "I'm going to need you to stay right here." He unclipped his radio. Victoria heard him call it in. Suspicious individual at Hargrove First National. Possible match for a financial fraud suspect. Requesting backup. He said it all in the flat, bored tone of someone filing a routine report. Like it was nothing. Like she was nothing. There was no fraud suspect. She knew that. He almost certainly knew that. But the words were out now, traveling through the radio, becoming real in the way that official language always did. Not because it was true, but because someone with a badge had said it. Tommy appeared from behind the counter. He was 29, maybe 30, with the look of someone who'd just been pulled into something he didn't understand. His name tag caught the light as he walked over. "Is everything okay?" "This your customer?" Porter asked, nodding at Victoria. "Yes, absolutely." Tommy looked between them. "Ms. Casper is a verified account holder. She just completed a transfer in our wealth office this morning. Is there some kind of problem?" "I'll determine that," Porter said. Tommy opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Victoria with an apology he didn't know how to say out loud. 2 more officers came through the front door 2 minutes later. Both young. Both already looking at Victoria the way Porter had told them to look at her before they even walked in. The lobby had gone quiet. The teller behind the counter had stopped typing. The older man who'd been filling out his deposit slip was watching now, his form forgotten in his hand. Victoria looked at all 3 officers. "I have not committed any crime," she said clearly. I am a verified account holder at this bank. The branch manager has confirmed that. There is no fraud suspect matching my description in any active report in this county. She said it calmly, the way she said things in a courtroom. Precisely. Without heat. Porter looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not doubt. Not reconsideration. Annoyance. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." The words hit the room like a slap. "Officer," I said, "turn around." Victoria stood very still for one breath. Just one. She looked at Tommy, whose face had gone the color of chalk. She looked at the two officers behind Porter, both of whom were looking just slightly off to the side. Not at her, not at their superior, but at some neutral point on the wall. The look of men who had already decided to let this happen. She turned around. The handcuffs were cold. They clicked into place in a bank lobby full of witnesses in front of 3 security cameras on a Thursday morning in October. Porter took her by the arm and walked her toward the door. Victoria kept her chin up. She didn't stumble. She didn't cry. She walked out of her own bank the way she walked into every courtroom, like the room belonged to her. Her eyes stayed open the whole way. She was memorizing everything. The processing area smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Victoria sat in a plastic chair against the wall with her hands folded in her lap and her bag on the floor beside her feet. The handcuffs were off. They'd removed them when they brought her in, but the skin on her wrists still held the memory of the metal. Cool. Tight. Wrong. She kept her face neutral. Around her, the room moved at the slow, indifferent pace of a place that had seen everything and cared about very little. An officer typed at a desk in the corner. A phone rang somewhere down the hall, and nobody answered it. A ceiling light flickered twice, steadied, flickered again. Porter stood at the processing counter with her ID in one hand and a form in the other. He was filling out the arrest sheet like it was a grocery list. Unhurried. Certain. His pen moved across the paper with the ease of a man who had done this 100 times and expected the same outcome every single one of them. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. As far as David Porter was concerned, this was already finished. Victoria watched him write her name. She'd been in this building before, dozens of times. Walked through the front entrance with a badge ID clipped to her lapel and a case file under her arm. Sat in the conference rooms. Stood in the parking lot talking to detectives. She knew the smell of this place. She knew the layout of it. She wondered how many people had sat in this exact chair and had no idea what their rights were. She wondered how many of them had no one to call. She wondered how many of them looked exactly like her. The door at the far end of the room swung open. Lieutenant Gary Simfield walked in fast, and fast wasn't his normal speed. He was 53, built like a man who used to be fit and had given up arguing about it, with a thick gray mustache and the permanent squint of someone who spent too much time under fluorescent lights. Victoria had seen him at community meetings. She had shaken his hand at a police fundraiser 2 years ago. He didn't look at her now. He walked straight to Porter and stopped close. Close enough that his voice dropped to something that wasn't quite a whisper, but wasn't meant to carry. "Did you run the name?" he said. Porter looked up from the form. "I ran her ID." "That's not what I asked. Did you run the name?" Porter's pen stopped moving. Something in Simfield's face made him set it down. "Run it now," Simfield said. He was already pulling his own phone out of his pocket with the tight, deliberate movements of someone trying very hard to stay calm. "Right now, David. Google it." Porter pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen. Still certain, still unbothered, still operating with the full confidence of a man who expected to be right. He typed, "Victoria Casper Hargrove County." The page loaded. The first result was the county's official government website. The link read, "Office of the District Attorney." Hargrove County, Georgia. Porter tapped it. The page opened. A professional photograph loaded at the top. A woman in a dark blazer. Direct gaze, composed expression. Beneath it, in clean official font, Victoria R. Casper District Attorney, Hargrove County, Georgia. The color left his face in one motion, like someone had reached up and turned a dial. His mouth opened slightly, closed. The arrest sheet was still in his other hand, her name written across the top of it in his own handwriting. Victoria watched him from across the room. She had known this moment was coming. Not hoped for it. Known. She had known it the way she knew what a jury was thinking before the foreperson stood up to read the verdict. She had sat in this chair and waited for it with the patience of someone who had learned a long time ago that certain truths had a way of arriving on their own schedule. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything. She just watched David Porter hold his phone in one hand and her arrest sheet in the other, and understand, slowly, horribly, completely, what he had done. Simfield was already on his phone, turned toward the wall, his voice low and clipped. Down the hall, a door opened. Heavy footsteps, measured, purposeful. Chief Raymond Hollis was on his way in. Hollis filled a doorway the way certain men did, not just with his body, but with the expectation that everyone in the room would rearrange themselves around his arrival. He was 61, broad across the chest, with silver hair cut close, and a face that had learned decades ago how to look concerned without actually being concerned. He wore his full uniform even though it was not yet 10 in the morning. That meant someone had called him before he left the house. That meant he had dressed for exactly this. He took in the room in one sweep. Simfield by the wall. Porter at the counter, still holding his phone. The arrest sheet on the desk. And Victoria, sitting in the plastic chair with her hands folded and her bag at her feet, watching him the way she watched witnesses who were about to lie to her face. Hollis crossed the room without hurrying. Ms. Casper. His voice was warm, practiced. The voice of a man who had talked his way out of difficult rooms for 20 years. I am so sorry for this inconvenience. Victoria said nothing. There's been a miscommunication. He spread his hands slightly, a gesture that was meant to look open and honest, and looked like neither. Officer Porter was responding to a report, and the situation wasn't properly assessed before. He fabricated a suspect description, Victoria said. There was no active fraud report. I confirmed that before he put the handcuffs on me. A beat of silence moved through the room. Hollis's expression didn't crack. It adjusted, the way a mask adjusts when the person wearing it shifts their weight. We're going to look very carefully at what happened here, he said. You have my personal assurance of that. He met her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. She had expected guilt or embarrassment. She would have almost respected embarrassment. What she saw instead was something colder. He was already calculating, already measuring the distance between what had happened and what could be managed. This wasn't a man confronting a mistake. This was a man deciding how much a mistake was going to cost him and what he was willing to spend to contain it. Victoria recognized the look. She had seen it on witnesses who knew they were cornered and were already planning their next move. She stood up. I'd like my belongings, she said. Everything was returned to her in a manila envelope. Her phone, her keys, her wallet, the ATM receipt. She checked each item without expression and signed the release form on the counter. Porter stood 6 feet away, with his arms at his sides, looking at a point on the floor somewhere between his feet and the wall. He had not said a single word since Hollis walked in. Victoria picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She didn't look back at Porter. She didn't look back at Hollis. She had nothing to say to either of them right now, and she had learned a long time ago that silence, used correctly, was louder than anything you could put into words. The front door of the Hargrove Police Department opened, and the October air hit her face. She walked to her car, got in, closed the door. She sat there. The parking lot was quiet. A pigeon moved along the curb across the street. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm beeped twice and stopped. The sun was doing what it always did, indifferent to everything that had just happened inside that building. 60 seconds. She gave herself exactly 60 seconds. She thought about her mother, about the folder in her bag with the estate transfer papers in it, about the $200 in her wallet that she had withdrawn for Mrs. Patricia, who would come tomorrow morning and would know nothing about any of this. She thought about the lobby of the bank and the sound the handcuffs made when they clicked shut. She thought about David Porter's face when he saw the county website load on his phone. She picked up her phone and called Donald. He answered on the second ring. "Aunt Viv, I need you to pull every complaint ever filed against Officer David Porter," she said. "Every single one, going back to the beginning, and I need you to find out who dismissed each one and when." A short pause. Not confusion, not hesitation. Just Donald, shifting into gear. "On it," he said. She heard his laptop open before she ended the call. Victoria put the car in reverse. Her hands on the wheel were completely steady. Her jaw was set. Her mind was already 5 moves ahead, sorting through everything she had just seen in that room. The arrest sheet, Hollis's eyes, the calculation behind them. She pulled out of the parking lot. She had work to do. The house was quiet by 9. Victoria sat at the desk in her home office with Porter's initial personnel file open in front of her. A cup of tea going cold at her elbow. The lamp threw a warm circle of light across the papers. Outside the window, the neighborhood had settled into the particular stillness of a weeknight. The occasional car passing, someone's television murmuring through a wall, the distant bark of a dog answering another dog 2 streets over. She had been home for 4 hours. She had changed out of her blazer, eaten half a sandwich standing over the kitchen sink, and gotten straight to work. There was no other way she knew how to process something. You moved, you built, you prepared. The file in front of her was thin, too thin for 16 years on the force. That alone told her something. She was halfway through her second read when her phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. She picked it up. Casper. The voice on the other end was low, careful. The voice of someone calling from a place they weren't supposed to be calling from. "You need to listen, and you need to listen fast." "I don't have long." Victoria sat up straight. She reached for a pen. "Hollis is with Fitch right now," the voice said. "Tonight. They're not going to wait on this. They're going to get in front of it before you do." A short pause, like the person was checking over their shoulder. "They're going to make it about you, about the money. They're going to say it doesn't add up." "Who is this?" Victoria said. "Someone who's watched this department cover things up for a long time and is tired of it." Another pause. "That's all I can give you." The line went dead. Victoria set the phone down. She stared at the wall for a moment. Gerald Fitch. She had known his name before she ran for DA. She had known it the way you know the name of a storm that's been building offshore for years. He had poured money into her opponent's campaign 18 months ago. He had made phone calls. He had pulled strings. He had done everything a man with his kind of entrenched power could do to keep a 35-year-old black woman out of that office. She had won anyway. Men like Fitch didn't forget things like that. She picked her pen back up and wrote 2 words on the legal pad beside the file. "They're moving." By 8 the next morning, the warning had become fact. Donald was already at the office when Victoria arrived, his laptop open, his expression tight in the way it got when something was wrong, and he was trying to figure out how wrong before he said it out loud. "It's already out," he said. He turned the laptop toward her. A local conservative blog, one with a readership large enough to matter, had published a story 40 minutes earlier. The headline sat at the top of the screen in bold letters, suggesting that the sudden appearance of $3 million in the personal account of District Attorney Victoria Casper warranted serious scrutiny and raising the possibility of a campaign finance irregularity. The sourcing was anonymous. The specifics were vague enough to avoid a defamation claim and detailed enough to sound credible to anyone who didn't know better. Victoria read it twice. She read it the way she read evidence submitted by opposing counsel, looking for the seams, the choices, the fingerprints of whoever had constructed it. It was well made. She would give them that. It was designed to exploit every doubt a person might reasonably have about a first-term DA who was young, who had come up fast, and whose sudden wealth had no obvious explanation to someone who hadn't been in that bank office yesterday morning. She straightened up. "Pull our formal correspondence inbox." Donald was already ahead of her. He handed her a printed notice that had arrived via official channels 30 minutes before she walked in. It was from the Hargrove Police Department's legal division. They were requesting the security footage from Hargrove First National Bank, specifically the ATM lobby recording from the previous morning. The request cited a vague and barely coherent legal pretext. At the bottom, a compliance deadline was printed in plain type: 48 hours. Victoria read the notice once, set it flat on the desk. The security footage was the whole thing, the record of exactly what Porter had done, exactly how he had done it, in front of witnesses and cameras. Without it, this came down to her word, against a 16-year veteran of the department. They knew that. She looked at Donald. "They just declared war," she said. Donald had been there since 6. Victoria could tell by the empty coffee cup already in the trash, and the second one steaming on the conference table beside a spread of printed documents that covered nearly every inch of the surface. He had arranged them in chronological order, oldest to newest, each one separated by a paper clip and a sticky note in his neat, small handwriting. 8 complaints. 16 years. Victoria set her bag down and stood at the edge of the table without sitting. She picked up the first file. The paper was dated 11 years ago. The complainant was a black man, 44 years old at the time, a high school football coach named Ron Tate. He had been stopped by Porter on a residential street 2 blocks from his own home, ordered out of his vehicle without cause, and detained on the sidewalk for 38 minutes, while Porter ran his plates 3 separate times and found nothing. Tate had filed the complaint the next day. Hollis's Internal Affairs Office had closed it in 9 days. Officer acted within departmental guidelines. No further action required. Victoria set it down and picked up the next one. A black woman, 51 years old, stopped in a pharmacy parking lot. Complaint dismissed in 12 days. Insufficient evidence to support complainant's account. Another. A black man, 27. Stopped outside a grocery store. Dismissed in 8 days. Officer acted in good faith based on observed circumstances. The language changed slightly from file to file, but only slightly. Just enough to look like separate decisions, not enough to hide that they were the same decision, made the same way, by the same office, every single time. Victoria read all 8. Then she read them again. Every single one, Donald said quietly from the other end of the table. He had his laptop open, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at the files spread across the table the way you looked at something that made you feel sick and angry at the same time. 8 complaints, 8 dismissals. The fastest one took 6 days. The slowest took 13. Same closing language throughout, Victoria said. Almost word for word on 5 of them. He paused. Hollis signed off on 7 himself. The 8th one was signed by his deputy, who has worked under Hollis for 14 years. Victoria picked up the second-to-last file. The complainant's name was Mrs. Eunice Bramble, age 67 at the time of filing, retired schoolteacher. The incident had occurred 6 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Bramble had been walking to her car after a doctor's appointment when Porter stopped her in the medical center parking lot, demanded her identification, questioned whether her vehicle was stolen, and refused to leave until a second officer arrived and confirmed her registration. She had stood in that parking lot for 45 minutes. She had filed the complaint the following week. Handwritten. 4 pages. Careful and precise, the way a former teacher's writing always was. Hollis's office had closed it in 10 days. Complainant appears to have misunderstood the nature of the officer's inquiry. Victoria stared at that line for a long moment. Misunderstood. She picked up her phone and dialed the number at the top of Mrs. Bramble's file. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice answered. Careful, a little wary, the way older people answered calls from numbers they didn't recognize. Mrs. Bramble, Victoria said, my name is Victoria Casper. I'm the district attorney for Hargrove County. I have your complaint file in front of me, and I want you to know that I have read every word of it. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to mean something. Then Mrs. Eunice Bramble began to cry. Not loudly. The quiet kind of crying that came from something that had been held in for a very long time. She apologized for it twice. Victoria told her not to. I didn't think anyone still had that file, Mrs. Bramble said when she found her voice. I didn't think someone young enough to still care would ever come looking. Victoria closed her eyes for 1 second. I care, she said. And I'm looking. She stayed on the phone for 20 minutes. She listened to all of it. The parking lot, the humiliation, the 10-day letter, the way Mrs. Bramble had told herself to let it go, and never quite managed to. When the call ended, Victoria looked across the table at Donald. I want every one of these formally documented, she said. Dates, dismissal language, Hollis's signature, all of it. We're building a pattern of conduct filing. Donald nodded and opened a new folder on his laptop. He thought for a moment. Then he typed the title across the top. Porter v. The Truth. City Hall smelled like floor wax and self-importance. Victoria had not called ahead. She had learned early in her career that certain conversations went better when the other person didn't have time to prepare a performance. She walked through the main entrance at 2 in the afternoon, nodded to the security guard who recognized her, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Mayor Dan Hale's assistant, a young woman named Brianna who always looked slightly apologetic about whatever was happening in that office, looked up from her desk and started to say something. Victoria was already walking past her. She knocked twice and opened the door. Hale was at his desk with a sandwich in one hand and a constituent letter in the other. He was 58, soft in the middle, with the careful smile of a man who had built an entire career on being agreeable to everyone and decisive for no one. He set the sandwich down and arranged his face into something that was meant to look welcoming. Victoria. He gestured at the chair across from him. I didn't know you were coming by. That was intentional, she said. She sat down and put the police department's footage request on his desk, turned so he could read it. I need you to intervene on this, formally, today. Hale looked at the document. He picked it up, read it, set it back down. His expression moved through several careful adjustments before landing on concerned. This is a sensitive situation, he said. It is, Victoria agreed. An officer from your city's police department falsely arrested a sitting district attorney in a bank lobby yesterday morning. The security footage documenting that arrest is now being requested by the same department under a legal pretext that wouldn't survive 10 minutes of scrutiny. I need that footage protected before it transfers to the people it was designed to incriminate. Hale leaned back slightly. I understand your frustration. I'm not frustrated, Dan. I'm asking you to do your job. Something shifted in his expression. Not offense. He was too practiced for that. More like the subtle recalibration of a man deciding how much of what he was actually thinking he was going to let show. The election is 6 weeks out, he said. Any formal action from my office on something like this, it becomes a story. It becomes a political story. And right now, with everything that's... He paused, selected his next words carefully. There are questions being raised about your situation that I think it would be wise to let settle before we start. Questions, Victoria said. The reporting this morning. The financial questions. He spread his hands in that open, honest gesture that looked like neither. I'm not saying I believe any of it, but perception matters in this business. And if I step in right now and it looks like I'm using my office to protect what? Her voice was even. A DA who was falsely arrested? A woman who was handcuffed in a bank lobby because an officer couldn't accept what he saw on an ATM screen? Hale looked at her the way men of his generation looked at women of hers when they said something that made him uncomfortable. Like the discomfort was somehow her fault. I think, he said carefully, that you might be taking this personally. The room held very still. Victoria looked at him for a moment, just long enough to let him sit in what he'd just said. Then she stood up, picked up the footage request from his desk, and put it back in her bag. Thank you for your time, she said. She walked out of his office, past Brianna's desk, and back to the elevator. She pressed the button and waited with her hands at her sides. Taking it personally, she thought about Mrs. Bramble standing in a parking lot for 45 minutes. She thought about Ron Tate on a sidewalk 2 blocks from his own home. She thought about 7 other people who had filed complaints and received the same 9-word dismissal in return. She thought about Hale reaching for his sandwich before she was fully out the door. The elevator opened. She stepped in and pulled out her phone. She typed a message to Donald as the doors closed. We do this without him. Then she scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in 3 weeks. A 404 area code. A name she trusted more than anyone in any room she had been in today. Judge Heather Orvis picked up on the second ring. Heather, Victoria said, I need your help. Tonight. A brief pause. Then, without hesitation, get me the subpoena number. Tonight. The coffee was still brewing when her phone rang. Victoria was in her kitchen, still in the clothes she'd slept in, which wasn't much of an exaggeration since she'd been at the desk until past midnight, going over subpoena language with Judge Orvis. She had managed 4 hours, maybe 4.5. The morning light coming through the window was pale and thin, the kind that arrived before the day had fully committed to itself. She looked at the screen. Tommy Milan, bank manager. She answered immediately. Tommy. Ms. Casper. His voice was low, careful. The voice of someone calling from a room they kept checking the door of. I'm sorry to call this early. I didn't know what else to do. Tell me what happened. A short breath. 2 men came to see me last night, after closing. They were waiting in the parking lot when I left the bank. He paused. They weren't police. They didn't show any ID. But they knew everything. My name, my title, how long I'd been at the branch. They asked me a lot of questions about what I said to the officers during what happened Wednesday morning. What kind of questions? Whether I'd be willing to put anything in writing. Whether I was planning to make any kind of statement. Whether I understood how these kinds of situations could affect a person's career trajectory. Another pause, longer this time. One of them mentioned my regional manager by name, like it was casual, like they were just making conversation. Victoria said nothing. She let him keep going. My regional manager called me this morning. 7:15. Said he'd heard there was some kind of situation involving a customer and that it would be in everyone's best interest for the bank to stay out of it. Tommy's voice dropped slightly. He said to avoid getting involved in politics. And what do you want to do? A long silence. I don't know, Tommy said quietly. I have a good job. I've worked hard for it. I'm 29. I'm just getting started, you know? And these people, whoever they are, they're making it very clear that— He stopped, started again. I'm not sure I can testify, Ms. Casper. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Don't apologize, she said. I'll call you back within the hour. She ended the call and stood at the kitchen counter for a moment. Then her office phone forwarded a notification to her cell. A formal correspondence received that morning from the State Bar Association. An anonymous complaint had been filed against her. The allegations were vague: improper use of office resources in relation to personal legal matters. It was thin, constructed to be thin. The kind of filing designed not to win but to consume. Time, energy, staff hours, attention. They were squeezing from every direction at once. Victoria read the bar notification twice, set her phone face down on the counter, and went to get dressed. The coffee shop 2 blocks from the bank was called Lena's. It had 6 tables, mismatched chairs, and the best cup of drip coffee in Hargrove County. Victoria had been coming here since she was a public defender. The woman behind the counter knew her order without asking. Tommy was already there when she arrived, seated at the table in the back corner, both hands wrapped around a mug he wasn't drinking from. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked like a young man who had walked into something much bigger than he was prepared for and was trying to figure out which direction was out. Victoria sat down across from him. She didn't open her bag. She didn't put anything on the table. She just sat there and looked at him the way she looked at people when she wanted them to understand that she was actually listening. I'm not going to pressure you, she said. Tommy looked up. I mean that. You're 29 years old. You've got your whole career ahead of you, and the people who sent those men to your parking lot are counting on that mattering more to you than anything else. She paused. What I want to tell you is what's actually at stake. Not for me, for everyone else. She told him about Mrs. Bramble, about the parking lot, and the 45 minutes, and the letter that said she had simply misunderstood. She told him about Ron Tate, stopped 2 blocks from his own home. She told him about all 8 files on her conference table and the identical dismissal language on every single one. Every single one of those people had something in common with me, she said. And every single one of them had no camera pointed at what happened to them. No branch manager standing 3 feet away. She looked at him steadily. You were there, Tommy. You saw it. That's not nothing. That's everything. The coffee shop was quiet around them. Somewhere near the window, a spoon clinked against a mug. Tommy stared at the table for a long moment. Then he wrapped both hands tighter around his cup, like he was drawing something from it. Okay, he said quietly. I'll testify. The preservation order was signed at 11:47 that same evening. Victoria was still at her desk when Judge Orvis sent the confirmation through. A single text message with a case number and 3 words. It is done. She read it twice, set her phone down, and allowed herself one full breath of something that felt almost like relief. Almost. The footage was locked. A federal magistrate in a circuit 3 counties removed from Fitch's reach had reviewed the emergency filing and signed it without hesitation. The bank's corporate compliance office received formal notice before midnight. The 48-hour clock that Hollis's legal division had been counting on had just stopped permanently. Whatever Porter had done in that lobby was preserved on record. They could not touch it now. Morning arrived gray and cool. Victoria was in the office by 7, and Miggy Walton was there 20 minutes later. He was 45, lean, with the permanent, slightly rumpled look of a man who spent more time chasing stories than sleeping. He had been at the Hargrove Courier for 16 years. He covered city politics, county government, and the long, complicated machinery of local power, with the kind of patient thoroughness that most readers never noticed, and everyone in that machinery feared deeply. He had a file on Hollis, had been building it quietly for almost 2 years. He had pieces, patterns, sources, documented incidents, but nothing that rose to the level of a publishable story on its own. He had been waiting for the thread that pulled everything together. Victoria had called him the previous afternoon. She had been careful and precise about what she shared. Only what was legally disclosable, only what was documented, nothing that crossed the line between cooperation and compromise. She laid the complaint files across the conference table and walked him through each one the same way she walked a jury through evidence. Methodical, clear, impossible to dismiss. Now he sat across from her with his notebook open and his pen moving. 6 of the 8 complainants, Victoria said, all documented, all formally filed, all dismissed by Hollis's office within 2 weeks. 3 of the 6 have agreed to be named on record. Mrs. Bramble, he said, by name, her words, her account, everything. Victoria paused. She's been waiting 6 years for someone to ask. Walton wrote without looking up. I can have this ready by tomorrow morning. Then have it ready by tomorrow morning. The story ran the next day at 7 a.m. Victoria read it at her kitchen table with her coffee. Walton had written it the way the best journalists wrote the things that mattered. Cleanly, without drama, letting the documented facts carry all the weight they needed to carry. 6 complaints. 6 dismissals. A 16-year pattern. Mrs. Eunice Bramble's name in the 4th paragraph, her account told in her own words, precise and quiet and devastating. By 9 in the morning, it had been picked up by 2 regional outlets. By noon, it had traveled further. The NAACP's legal observers contacted Victoria's office at 1:15. 2 state legislators called within the hour, both expressing support, both using careful language that told her they were watching to see which way this was going to land before they committed to anything more than a phone call. She thanked them both and asked them to stay close. Her office phone rang steadily through the afternoon. Reporters, community organizations, former law school colleagues, people who had voted for her and wanted her to know they still believed in her. She returned the calls she needed to return and let Donald handle the rest. At 3 o'clock, something else began to happen. Online, a groundswell was building. Younger voices, people who had followed her campaign, people who recognized their own experiences in the bank lobby story, pushing back loudly and with volume against the smear narrative that Fitch's allies had been circulating since Thursday morning. The fabricated campaign finance story was being taken apart, piece by piece in real time, by people who were faster and more thorough than whoever had constructed it. For the first time since Wednesday morning, the current was moving in a different direction. That evening, Victoria was still at her desk when her cell phone rang. She looked at the screen. Mrs. Bramble. She answered. I saw it. Mrs. Bramble's voice was full of something warm and unsteady at the same time. On the evening news. They said my name on the evening news. A pause. A small, quiet sound that was mostly breath. I cried good tears tonight, baby. Good tears. For the first time in 6 years. Victoria pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose and kept her voice steady. You deserved to be heard a long time ago, she said. I'm just glad we got here. She sat with that for a long time after the call ended. The night outside her window was quiet. For one evening, it felt like the tide had finally turned. The story dropped at 6:43 in the morning. Victoria was still asleep when Donald called. He never called before 8. She knew before she answered that something was wrong. Turn on your computer, he said. Right now. She was at her desk in 4 minutes, still in her robe, her hair unpinned. The article was already pulled up on Donald's shared screen. A national conservative media outlet, one with a reach that made the local blog look like a flyer stapled to a telephone pole, had picked up the campaign finance fabrication overnight and rebuilt it into something unrecognizable from the original lie. The new version had specifics. A source described only as close to the ongoing investigation had provided a detailed claim that the $3 million deposit into Victoria Casper's personal account corresponded suspiciously with the timeline of a civil settlement in a case she had prosecuted 18 months ago. The implication was laid out carefully, just vague enough to avoid legal liability and just specific enough to sound like something a guilty person would hope nobody noticed. Victoria read it once. Then she read it again. Slower. The way she read things she needed to fully understand before she responded to them. It was precise. Surgical. Someone with knowledge of her prosecutorial record had constructed this. Someone who had done their research and understood exactly which details to twist and which gaps to leave open for the public imagination to fill in. This wasn't opportunism. This was architecture. "How far has it traveled?" she asked. Donald's voice was tight. "It's everywhere. It got picked up by 4 more outlets in the last hour. Social media is—" He paused. "It's bad, Aunt Viv." By 10 in the morning, the State Attorney General's office issued a formal statement. In careful, neutral language, the statement announced that in light of recent reporting, the AG's office was opening a preliminary inquiry into the conduct of Hargrove County District Attorney Victoria Casper. The inquiry was described as standard procedure, precautionary. Nothing punitive had been determined. What it meant, in plain language, was this: Victoria could not prosecute any active state cases while the inquiry was open. She read the statement at her desk with Donald standing in the doorway. Her staff moved quietly in the outer office, voices low, trying not to look like they were listening. She had been effectively removed from power. No charge, no hearing, no evidence presented or tested or challenged. Just a statement and a preliminary inquiry, and a system that had learned over many years that you didn't need to convict someone to destroy them. You just needed to make enough noise for long enough. She was 37 years old. She had passed the bar at 24. She had prosecuted over 200 cases. She had been elected district attorney of Hargrove County at 35, the first black woman to hold the office in the county's entire history. And she had been neutralized, not by evidence, not by law, but by a lie told loudly enough and spread fast enough that the truth couldn't keep up. She set the statement down. Then her phone rang. Donald picked it up at his desk and came to her door 30 seconds later. His expression told her before he opened his mouth. "It's about Jerome Hadley," he said. Jerome Hadley was 71 years old. He had filed one of the complaints in Porter's file. 6 years ago, a stop and detain that had lasted nearly an hour on a public sidewalk outside his barber shop. His account was documented, detailed, and credible. He had agreed to testify. He was currently in county lockup. A parole officer named Dennis Greer, whose name appeared twice in Donald's research as a social contact of Porter's, had filed a technical violation against Hadley the previous afternoon. A missed check-in appointment. Hadley's attorney said the appointment had been rescheduled 2 weeks prior with written confirmation. The violation had been filed anyway. Hadley had been picked up that morning. Victoria sat with that information for a long time. Outside her office window, the sky had gone the flat gray color of a day that had given up trying. The street below was ordinary. Cars, pedestrians, the indifferent motion of a city that didn't know or care what was happening on the 3rd floor of the county building. She thought about Mrs. Bramble's voice on the phone last night. Good tears, baby. She thought about Jerome Hadley, 71 years old. sitting in a county lockup cell because he had been willing to tell the truth. She thought about Hollis's eyes in that police station, cold and calculating behind the practiced warmth. She picked up her phone. She called Judge Orvis. The older woman listened to every word without interrupting. When Victoria finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Judge Orvis spoke, slowly and clearly, like someone delivering a verdict. Victoria. They made one mistake. A pause. They underestimated how long you've been watching them, and how much faster you move than they do. The building was empty by 9. Her staff had gone home. The outer office was dark, the phones forwarded. The hallway outside her door quiet in the way that government buildings got quiet after hours. Not peaceful, just absent, like a held breath. Victoria was still at her desk. The AG inquiry notice sat on one side of her desk. Donald's printout on Jerome Hadley's arrest sat on the other. Between them, her hands were flat on the surface, fingers spread, like she was trying to feel the temperature of something through the wood. She had been sitting like that for a while. She was not a person who fell apart. She had never been that person. When her father lost his job the year she started high school, she had not fallen apart. She had gotten a part-time job at a copy center and done her homework between customers. When her law school scholarship came in $3,000 short of what she needed, she had not fallen apart. She had found 2 part-time jobs and a professor willing to write letters to 3 different foundations. When opposing counsel tried to rattle her in her first big trial, standing 6 inches too close and speaking over her objections, she had not fallen apart. She had won the case. She had built her entire life on the principle that the only response to a wall was to find the door in it. Right now, she was having trouble finding the door. She picked up her phone and called Judge Orvis. It was past 11. Heather Orvis answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant she had been expecting this call. "Tell me everything," Orvis said. Victoria told her. All of it. The national story and the surgical precision of its construction. The AG inquiry and what it meant for her caseload. Jerome Hadley in county lockup on a technical violation that had been manufactured from a rescheduled appointment. The bar complaint consuming her staff's time. The mayor's door. The 2 men in Tommy's parking lot. The footage request with its 48-hour deadline stopped, yes, but only barely, and only because they had moved fast enough. She laid it out the way she laid out cases, chronological, documented, every piece in its place. When she finished, the line was quiet, not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, the quiet of someone who had just finished listening carefully and was now deciding exactly how to begin. "They are very good at this," Orvis said finally. Her voice was measured, precise. It was the voice she used when she wanted each word to carry full weight. "I'll give them that. They moved fast. They moved from multiple directions at once, and they used every tool available to them." A pause. "But they made one mistake." Victoria waited. "They treated this like a political problem," Orvis said. "They ran a political playbook. Smear the reputation, neutralize the authority, isolate the target. And it would have worked on a politician." Another pause, deliberate. "But you're not a politician, Victoria. You're a prosecutor. And they handed you evidence of federal crimes while you were watching." Victoria's eyes moved to the desk, to the papers in front of her. "Walk me through it," she said. "Tommy Milan." Orvis's voice was steady. 2 unidentified individuals in his parking lot, making direct references to his career and his management chain. That is witness intimidation. That is a federal crime. A beat. Jerome Hadley. A technical parole violation filed by a parole officer with documented social ties to the arresting officer, filed the day after Hadley agreed to provide testimony. That is obstruction of justice. That is a federal crime. Another beat. The coordinated smear campaign, the fabricated financial allegations timed specifically to trigger an AG inquiry and remove you from prosecutorial authority. That is a conspiracy to obstruct justice. And if we can trace it to a financial transaction, which I suspect we can, it is racketeering. The words landed one by one in the quiet room. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Something harder and more useful than hope. Clarity. Now, Orvis said, stop playing defense on the case they handed you. Start prosecuting the one you've been building. She paused one final time. I have a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia. His name is Alan Prescott. He has maintained a circumstantial file on Raymond Hollis for nearly 2 years. Good material. Patterns, documented conduct, corroborating sources. What he has been missing is a clean, documented triggering case that puts everything in one place. Victoria was already reaching for her legal pad. Tell me who to call, she said. Alan Prescott answered his personal line at 7 the next morning. He was expecting the call. Judge Orvis had reached him the previous night, after she and Victoria had finished their conversation. And whatever she had said to him had been enough. His voice was measured and professional, with the particular quality of a man who had been waiting for a specific phone call for a long time and was being careful not to show how much. D.A. Casper, he said. Judge Orvis speaks very highly of you. She's generous, Victoria said. I'll let the file speak for itself. She spent the next 40 minutes doing what she had done in courtrooms for 13 years. She built the case. Piece by piece, document by document, she laid out everything she had. Organized the way she organized every prosecution, in the order that would make the most sense to someone encountering it for the first time and needed to understand not just the individual facts, but the shape of what those facts described together. She started with Porter's complaint file. 16 years, 8 complaints, 8 dismissals. The pattern of identical closing language across cases handled by different staff members under Hollis's supervision, suggesting not independent judgment, but coordinated instruction. She moved to the arrest itself. The fabricated fraud report, the absence of any active suspect description in the county database, the presence of 3 security cameras and a branch manager who had confirmed her account status before the handcuffs went on. Then she moved to what came after. Tommy Meelan. 2 unidentified men in a parking lot the evening following the arrest. Direct references to his career and his regional management. The phone call from his regional manager at 7:15 the following morning. Witness intimidation. Documented and time-stamped. Jerome Hadley. A parole technical violation filed by Dennis Greer, a parole officer whose name appeared in Donald's research as a documented social contact of Porter's, filed the afternoon after Hadley confirmed his willingness to testify. The violation based on a check-in appointment that Hadley's own attorney had rescheduled in writing 2 weeks prior. Obstruction of justice, engineered and traceable. The smear campaign. The anonymous tip to local outlets. The national story with its surgical specificity, constructed from details that required access to her prosecutorial case history. The coordinated timing of the AG inquiry, triggered within hours of the story going national, effectively removing her from prosecutorial authority without a single charge being filed or a single piece of evidence being tested. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. And finally, though she did not have the full financial documentation yet, she told him it was coming. The suspected connection between Fitch's Political Action Committee and a financial arrangement with someone in Hollis's inner circle. Racketeering, if the money trail held. When she finished, there was a silence on the line that felt different from uncertainty. It felt like assessment. How is this organized? Prescott said. Chronologically, with a parallel track separating Porter's individual conduct from Hollis's institutional cover-up. Every document is referenced by date and source. The complaint files are certified copies. Tommy Milan has confirmed his willingness to testify on record. Hadley's attorney has provided the written rescheduling confirmation for the missed appointment. Another pause. "You built this while they were running the smear campaign," he said. "It wasn't quite a question." "I've been building parts of it since Wednesday morning," she said. "They gave me the rest of it themselves." She heard something on the other end that might have been a short, quiet sound of appreciation. "Send me everything by noon," Prescott said. "I want my team looking at this today." Over the next 2 days, Victoria communicated with Prescott's office through secured channels, encrypted correspondence, direct calls on a dedicated line, 2 video conferences that Donald set up from a laptop, running through the office's most secure connection. She answered every question they had. She provided every document they requested. She filled every gap they identified with the precision of someone who had spent 13 years making sure there were no gaps. She did not tell anyone outside of Donald and Judge Orvis what was happening. In the meantime, she returned to her public duties with deliberate, visible normalcy. She attended a scheduled meeting with county commissioners. She returned press calls through her communications staff with brief, measured statements. She responded formally and without urgency to the state bar complaint. She gave every indication of a woman managing a difficult situation with composure. She gave no indication of a woman who had just handed a federal prosecutor the case he had been waiting 2 years to make. On the second evening, Prescott called. "We're drafting the warrants," he said. Victoria set her pen down on her desk and closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "How long?" she said. 3 days. Maybe 2. She opened her eyes. "I'll be here," she said. The knock came just after 2 in the afternoon. Victoria was at her desk reviewing Prescott's latest request for supplemental documentation when Donald appeared in her doorway with an expression she didn't immediately recognize. Not alarm. Something more careful than that. "There's a Sergeant Oswald here," he said quietly. "Paula Oswald, Hargrove PD. She doesn't have an appointment. She said she needs to speak with you privately, and that you'll want to hear what she has to say." Victoria looked up. "Does she have ID?" "Showed it at the front desk. She's alone. No one from the department knows she's here." He paused. "She's got something with her." "A notebook." Victoria set her pen down. "Send her in." Close the door behind her. Sergeant Paula Oswald was 41, solidly built, with natural hair pulled back and the composed, watchful expression of someone who had spent years in rooms where they had to be careful about what they let their face say. She wore plain clothes, not her uniform. She had thought about that before she came. She sat down across from Victoria without being asked and placed a worn composition notebook on the desk between them. The cover was creased and soft from handling. The edges of the pages were uneven, some of them flagged with small paper tabs. She kept her hand on it for a moment before she let go. "I've been at Hargrove PD for 14 years, she said. "I have watched David Porter do what he does for most of those 14 years. I have watched complaints get filed and disappear. I have watched Hollis's office close investigations before they were ever really open." She paused. "I started keeping this about 8 years ago, because I knew someday there would be a reason to have it, and I wanted to be ready when that day came." Victoria looked at the notebook. "What's in it?" "Dates, incidents, names of colleagues who were present and said nothing, specific details that were never in any official report because they were never meant to be." Oswald's voice was even, controlled. "Including an entry from last Wednesday." She reached across and opened the notebook to a tabbed page near the back. The handwriting was small and precise, each line straight across the unlined page, with the discipline of someone who had trained herself to write carefully. Victoria read it, The entry was dated the morning of her arrest. The time notation at the top read 11:20 a.m., less than 2 hours after Porter had put the handcuffs on her. According to the entry, Oswald had been present in the break room at the station when Porter came in with 2 other officers. He was still riding the energy of the arrest. He was talking about it the way certain men talked about things they were proud of. He said he had known something was off the moment he saw the balance on the screen. He said it didn't add up. He said he'd trusted his gut and acted on it. He said all of this before anyone in that room had any idea who Victoria Casper was. The entry documented his exact words, the names of the 2 officers present, and the time. It was written in ink, in a notebook that clearly predated last Wednesday by years. It was contemporaneous evidence of discriminatory intent, recorded before the arrest had any political dimension at all. Victoria read it twice. Then she looked up at Oswald. "Why now?" she said. Not skeptically, genuinely. Oswald met her eyes. "Because you're still here. Because you didn't take the quiet settlement and go away. Because you're 37 years old, and you're doing what women twice your age tried to do in that department and got pushed out for." She paused. "I've been waiting for someone who wouldn't disappear." The office was very quiet. "I need to photograph every page," Victoria said. "And I need a signed statement about the chain of custody. When you started the journal, how it's been stored, the dates of each relevant entry." I brought it. Oswald reached into her jacket and produced a folded document, already notarized. Victoria worked until midnight. At 1:47 in the morning, her phone rang. Donald. She answered before the first ring finished. Aunt Viv. His voice was stretched tight, with something that was trying very hard not to be excitement yet. "I've been going through Fitch's PAC filings for the last 6 hours. There's a contribution, $75,000, to a consulting firm called Meridian Strategic Group. I can't find a single thing Meridian Strategic Group has ever actually done. No website, no office address, no staff." He took a breath. "But I found the registered agent. It's a man named Curtis Vane. Curtis Vane is Raymond Hollis's brother-in-law." The room went absolutely still. "Send me everything," Victoria said. She was already reaching for her laptop. Before sunrise, she forwarded Donald's complete financial documentation and Oswald's photographed journal to Alan Prescott's secured line with a single line of accompanying text. Here is the rest of it. The story ran at 6 in the morning. Miggy Walton had held it for 48 hours while his editor ran it through the paper's legal team 3 times. Now it was out. The full financial connection between Fitch's PAC and Meridian Strategic Group, the shell company with no website, no office, no staff, and a registered agent who was the chief of police's brother-in-law. Donald had found it at 2 in the morning at his kitchen table. By 6, it was on the front page of the Hargrove Courier's website, with Walton's byline and every supporting document attached. By 7, it had been picked up nationally. By 8, Victoria's office phone had stopped being a phone and become something closer to a siren. She let Donald handle the calls. She sat at her desk and watched the story travel the way you watched a fire you had helped start, with the particular calm of someone who had calculated the wind direction in advance. At 9:47 that morning, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants on 2 locations. The first was the Internal Affairs Division of the Hargrove Police Department. The second was Councilman Gerald Fitch's suite of offices on the 4th floor of the Hargrove Municipal Building, 3 floors directly below where Victoria was sitting. She heard about it from Donald, who had walked to the window and was watching the street below. "They're bringing boxes out," he said quietly. He wasn't smiling. Neither was she. This wasn't the moment for that. Downtown Hargrove went still the way a room went still when someone said something that changed everything. People on the sidewalk stopped. Cars slowed. 2 television cameras appeared within 20 minutes, their lenses pointed at federal agents moving in and out of the building in an unhurried, methodical procession that was somehow more frightening than urgency would have been. This was not a warning. This was the thing itself. The following morning, Victoria was called into a closed session with Deputy Chief Sandra Aden, Hollis's second-in-command, who had spent the last 12 hours trying to figure out which side of this she was going to be standing on when it was over. The session lasted 11 minutes. Aden told her that Officer David Porter had been suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full federal civil rights investigation. His badge and service weapon were being surrendered that afternoon. Victoria thanked her and left. She drove to the Hargrove PD and parked across the street. She did not go inside. She sat in her car and waited. At 3:15, David Porter walked out of the building in plain clothes. He was carrying a paper bag that held whatever had been in his locker. He had surrendered his badge and his weapon in front of his entire precinct. 16 years of authority, handed over in a room full of people he had spent 16 years believing would always stand beside him. He walked to his truck alone. Nobody followed him out. In the back of the room, according to a text message Victoria received 4 minutes later from a number she recognized, Sergeant Paula Oswald had watched the whole thing from the back wall and had not hidden how she felt about it. Victoria read the text, put her phone in her bag, started her car. The next morning, Chief Raymond Hollis resigned. His attorney released a prepared statement at 10 a.m. that was 4 paragraphs long and said nothing. It referenced his decades of service. It expressed confidence in the department's future. It did not acknowledge the federal obstruction charges forming around him like walls closing in, because acknowledging them would have meant acknowledging what he had done to build them. A reporter asked whether Hollis planned to cooperate with the federal investigation. His attorney said the statement spoke for itself. The statement spoke for nothing. Within the hour, 53 minutes to be exact, as Donald timed it, the State Attorney General's office issued a formal notice that the preliminary inquiry into Victoria Casper had been closed. The basis for the inquiry had been found to be without merit. Her full prosecutorial authority was hereby restored, effective immediately. She was in her office when the notice came through. Her staff had gathered in the outer room. Nobody had announced anything. They had simply drifted together the way people did when something significant was happening, and they wanted to be near it. When Donald read the notice out loud, the room erupted. Victoria stood in the doorway of her office and let them have it. Let them cheer and hug and pull out their phones to call people. She watched all of it, with her hands at her sides, and her jaw steady, and something burning quietly behind her eyes that she was not going to let become tears. Not yet. 4 days later, Gerald Fitch was indicted on federal charges of conspiracy and witness tampering. The photograph that ran in every outlet showed him leaving his home on a Tuesday morning in a rumpled suit, one hand raised toward the cameras, his face compressed into the expression of a man who had spent 40 years arranging the world to his advantage and was only now beginning to understand that the arrangement had come apart. Donald watched the coverage from the office couch that evening, his laptop balanced on his knees. He stared at the photograph for a long moment. "It's over," he said. Victoria was at her desk, already back on a case file, one of the 12 that had been frozen during the inquiry, now hers again. She looked up. "Not yet," she said. Jerome Hadley walked out of Hargrove County lockup at 8:22 in the morning. The engineered parole violation had been formally dismissed by court order the previous afternoon. Judge Orvis had seen to that personally, filing the motion herself with the kind of quiet authority that reminded everyone in the relevant clerk's office exactly who she was and exactly how long her memory was. The paperwork had been processed overnight. By 8:15, a corrections officer had unlocked Jerome Hadley's cell and told him he was free to go. Victoria was waiting outside on the sidewalk. She had driven herself. No staff, no cameras, no press release. Just her car parked at the curb, and the thin October morning light coming down flat and pale across the parking lot. Hadley came through the front door slowly. He was 71, a small man who carried himself with the particular dignity of someone who had been knocked down enough times to have made a decision about how they were going to stand back up. He wore the same clothes he'd been brought in wearing. He had a paper bag with his belongings in one hand, and he stopped on the top step when he saw her. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked. Then he came down the steps and took both of her hands in both of his. His grip was firm and warm, and said everything that the words he was searching for couldn't quite reach. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not giving up." Victoria looked away. Just for a second. Just long enough. "You should have never been in there," she said. He nodded slowly. "No," he agreed. "I shouldn't have." He paused. "But a lot of things shouldn't have happened that did. For a long time." He looked at her steadily. "Difference is, now something's going to happen about it." She drove him home. The press conference was at noon. The room was full. Every local outlet, 3 regional affiliates, 2 national reporters who had followed the story from the moment the federal warrants were executed, camera crews along the back wall, rows of folded chairs that had filled up 40 minutes early, Victoria's full staff along the side wall, Donald in the front row with a notepad he wasn't going to need, and Mrs. Eunice Bramble, 67 years old, retired schoolteacher, seated in the second row in a navy blue dress, with her hands folded in her lap and her chin up. Victoria stood at the podium and looked out at the room. She did not have notes. She had never needed notes for the things that mattered. "On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks ago," she said, "I was handcuffed in the lobby of my bank by an officer who could not reconcile what he saw on an ATM screen with what he believed he was looking at when he looked at me." She paused. Let the room sit with that. The charge was dropped the same day. The incident was called a miscommunication. And if I had been anyone other than who I am, if I had been one of the dozens of people in this county who have been treated the same way without a title or a platform or a camera pointed at what happened to them, that would have been the end of it. The room was completely still. "What happened to me happens here every day," she said. It happened to Jerome Hadley outside his barber shop. It happened to Ron Tate 2 blocks from his own home. It happened to Eunice Bramble in a medical center parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, and when she filed a complaint about it, she was told she had misunderstood. Her voice stayed level. "This office will no longer look the other way. Not for a badge, not for a title, not for anyone, not ever again." She looked directly at Mrs. Bramble when she said the last part. Mrs. Bramble stood up. She just stood, didn't say anything, just rose from her chair in her navy blue dress and brought her hands together. The room followed her. All of it. Every chair, every camera crew, every reporter. A standing ovation that filled the room from floor to ceiling and pressed against the walls. Victoria gripped the sides of the podium and kept her face composed through sheer will. 3 weeks later, the reconstituted Hargrove City Council, meeting for the first time without Gerald Fitch's seat occupied, voted unanimously to establish an independent civilian review board for the Hargrove Police Department. Full subpoena power, independent oversight, mandatory public reporting. At Victoria's personal request, it was named the Bramble-Casper Accountability Initiative. Mrs. Bramble's name came first. The governor's office called 2 days after the vote. Victoria had been nominated for the state's highest legal service honor, the youngest nominee in the award's 53-year history. She thanked the governor's aide, set the phone down, and went back to work. On a Friday afternoon in late October, she stopped at Hargrove First National Bank on her way home. She parked in the same spot, walked through the same front door, crossed the same lobby with its cold air and carpet cleaner smell, and its morning light falling in long rectangles across the floor. She inserted her card at the same ATM, entered her PIN, the same one she'd used for 11 years, withdrew $200 for Mrs. Patricia, who had come that morning and would come again next week and the week after that. She folded the bills into her wallet without counting them, collected her card, picked up her bag, turned around. The lobby was ordinary. A teller typed behind the counter. An older man filled out a deposit slip near the door. Nobody looked up. Nobody moved toward her. Nobody needed to explain themselves or prove anything to anyone. She walked out through the front doors into the October sunlight and got into her sensible sedan. She sat there for a moment. Not 60 seconds this time. Just a moment. Then she started the car and drove home. Justice doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just walks out the door. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.